Hello, I'm Maurice Powell. Welcome to A Little Light Music, Manx Radio's regular Thursday evening classical music hour. And we're going to begin this evening's programme with a very popular piece by Vaughan Williams. And I'd like to dedicate this piece to a very special person at Nobles Hospital. Now, some of you may know that at the moment I'm undergoing a series of, shall we say, treatments courtesy of Nobles Hospital, the details of which are too gruesome to be broadcast even on Manx Radio. But nevertheless, things seem to be going well. And I particularly like this first piece, if she's listening, to be dedicated to the nurse, Emily, who I see every week. We have a bit of a chat, a bit of a giggle while she does unspeakable things to me, and we seem to get on very well. Emily is, of course, extremely professional, and I couldn't be in better hands. So thank you, Emily, for all that you've done over the last few weeks and for the next few weeks as well. I shall miss you all, I'm sure. So, Emily's son plays in one of our local wind bands, so I thought I'd play something for Military Band for Emily and her family. So this is Vaughan Williams, this is the English Folk Song Suite. It's the first movement, written in 1923 for one of the best-known military bands of all time, the Military Band of Nella Hall, which is, of course, the training ground for army bandsmen. There are three folk songs in this little piece, 17 Come Sunday, Pretty Caroline, and Dives and Lazarus. So, for Emily and her family, Vaughan Williams, the English Folk Song Suite. The opening movement of Vaughan Williams' English Folk Song Suite, originally written for Military Band, the Military Band of Nella Hall. Now, I thought you might just be interested to hear the original folk song version of one of the themes there. It's the opening melody from that suite, 17 Come Sunday. This was collected many, many years before by the composer Percy Grainger. And this was only about 2.5 minutes. This is his version of the original folk song. He would have originally, of course, taken down the folk song by hand, possibly even using a primitive recording machine, from a local singer of the time, and then of course he then built it into his own version, and it's that version which the piece we've just heard is based on. So here is Percy Grainger's version of that lovely folk song 17 Come Sunday.
As I rose up one May morning so early, I overtook a pretty fair maid, just as the sun was dawning in the blue ray. For the little lay, what farther did I go? Her stockings white and her boots were bright and her buckling shone like silver. She had a dark and a rolling eye and a heron on her shoulder with me ray. For the little lay, what farther did I go? Where are you going, my pretty fair maid? Where are you going, my honey? She answered me right cheerfully, I'm the heron forming cloud, me with me ray. For the little lay, what farther did I go? How old are you, my pretty fair maid? How old are you, my honey? She answered me right cheerfully, I am 17 come Sunday with me ray. For the little lay, what farther did I go? Will you take a man, my pretty fair maid? Will you take a man, my honey? She answered me right cheerfully, I was not for me, now be with me ray. For the little lay, what farther did I go? Will you come down to me when the sun shone bright, shone bright and clearly? You'll come down, I'll let you in, and if only shall not hear me, with me ray. For the little lay, what farther did I go? Oh, now I'm with my soldier, and his ways they are so winning. Strong and fine is my delight, and the fight around in the morning with me ray. For the little lay, what farther did It's now I'm with my soldier, and his ways they are so winning. It's strong and fine is my delight, and the fight around in the morning, and the fight around in the morning. It's now I'm with my soldier, and his ways they are so winning. It's strong and fine is my delight, and the fight around in the morning, and the fight around in the morning.
There we have Percy Grainger's arrangement of the folk song we first heard in the Vaughan Williams English Folk Song Suite, 17 Come Sunday, which he collected years before the First World War, and that's his arrangement of it. Very nice and jaunty, quite difficult to sing, quirky, of course, as all Percy Grainger's music is, and requires a huge orchestra. So there we are. Now to the music of Sullivan, Arthur Sullivan, before he became Sir Arthur Sullivan, and long before he met Gilbert, with whom, of course, he wrote the famous operettas, Mikado, Iolanthe, Patience, and so on and so forth. Now, before he met Gilbert, Sullivan was considered probably England's finest composer. We're going to hear something a bit later in the programme from one of Sullivan's contemporaries, another English composer whose music is by nowhere near as well known as Sullivan's. But Sullivan was the main man in the first half, certainly, of the 19th century. And I'm going to play now what I think He's probably his best orchestral piece. It's the Overture in Memoriam. This was written in 1866 and first performed at the Norwich Festival on the 30th of October that year, conducted by another composer, the opera composer Julius Benedict. Now, he wrote this overture for his father, who died that year, and his father, believe it or not, was a professor of wind instruments at, you'll never guess, Kneller Hall, which we mentioned in connection with the Vaughan Williams piece, which was also written for the military band at Kneller Hall. So, a little bit of a link there. It's a very fine piece. It had a wonderful opening melody, which comes back at the end in a much more grandiose manner. Sullivan himself said that this overture was meant to reflect the grief he felt at the death of his father, and of course the great affection he felt for his father. So this is Sullivan, not at all in his Mikado mood. The Overture in Memoriam. A very fine piece, Sullivan's Overture in Memoriam, and not a hint of the punishment fits the crime many, many years later after he met W.S. Gilbert. There's a good deal of music of Sullivan's that we never hear. Most attractive is I think, is this overture we've just heard, but also a huge amount of incidental music he wrote for productions of Shakespeare plays. The Tempest comes to mind, particularly fine. He also wrote a symphony, which is very well worth hearing, and a number of oratorios which have virtually disappeared from the repertoire. So, not to neglect Arthur Sullivan. So where does that leave us? We need a short piece now, just to sort of act as a wedge before we move on to something I don't think I've ever played before. We'll come on to that in a sec. We need something by Sidney Torch, a little piece called Meandering. Now, Sidney Torch was a very fine pianist and violinist before he ever became a composer. He also wrote music for cinema orchestras, just as things were changing from the silent movies to the talkies. He then became a theatre organist of some repute in the 1930s, a bit like the island's own Dr. George Tootle, who was a very fine cinema organist here in the years before the war. He was in the Air Force in World War II. Post-war, he devoted himself to conducting and composing, mainly for radio, and he became an even more prolific composer, writing over 100 pieces of music for the famous Chapel Music Library. In 1953, he helped devise the BBC's long-running Friday Night is Music Night programme. Sidney Torch, Meandering. Sidney Torch, Meandering. Typical piece of British light music, really. It's why I like the genre so much. It's jolly, bouncy, doesn't outstay its welcome. It has a kind of a whistling tune, doesn't it? Which actually, I've just tried it while the microphone was off there. Not that easy to actually whistle, but you know what I mean. Now, a very important notice. Coming up this Sunday, the 6th of April, at the Royal Hall at the Villa Marina at 3 o'clock. It's the annual concert of the Isle of Man Choral Society, together with the Isle of Man Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Mandy Griffin. A wonderful programme of French music, including Fauré's Sublime Requiem, Poulenc's very exciting and colourful Gloria, and very substantial excerpts from Bizet's wonderful opera Carmen. How could you resist it? That's Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock, the Royal Hall at the Villa Marina, the annual concert of the Isle of Man Choral Society with the Isle of Man Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Mandy Griffin, and there will be soloists as well, of course. Tickets are available from the Villa Gaiety box office or, of course, at the door. So, Fauré, Poulenc, Bizet. What could be better? So, where does that leave us? Oh, yes. Now then, during the next this programme and the next two programmes, I'm going to play some light music that I'm fairly certain I've never played before. In fact, I know I haven't played these before, but I've only just acquired them on CD for the first time. I've never heard them before either, apart from a quick playthrough to make sure that they were interesting enough for our programme. And I've chosen as the first of these unknown pieces a piece by the composer John Fox. It's called A Surrey Rhapsody. Now, John Fox was born in Surrey in 1924. He studied the piano and the violin at the Royal College of Music and became a conductor with the BBC. This particular piece, it depicts a dawn chorus, distant bells and the beauty of the Surrey hills, which John Fox knew so well. He was quite a prolific composer and wrote most of his music for the famous libraries of short pieces, such as the famous Chapel library that the Sydney Torch piece we've just heard was written for. These were libraries of short pieces for all sorts of occasions, and most of them ended up on the radio as theme tunes or on television, of course. Anyway, John Fox, A Surrey Rhapsody. That was an evocation of the Surrey Hills by the composer John Fox, a Surrey Rhapsody. Always interesting to hear a musical evocation of an area a particular composer knows well. We're used to it with Vaughan Williams, to a certain extent with Elgar, with Delius. Maybe it's the thing with English composers, I don't know. But, well, there's certainly a lot more to the Surrey Hills than I remember. The only thing I remember about the Surrey Hills, I've never lived in Surrey, or even visited it very much, even when I lived in London. But I did climb up Box Hill once, which I think is somewhere near where Vaughan Williams lived at one time. Very beautiful, but obviously John Fox, who lived there for all his life, was born there in fact, and knew that area intimately. A very fine piece, the Surrey Rhapsody. Now, one of Sullivan's most interesting contemporaries was George Macfarren, born the same year as Wagner and Verdi, 1813, but that's where the similarity ends. He studied at the Royal Academy from 1829. He was made a professor there in 1834 and a professor of music at Cambridge in 1875. In 1876, a year before his death, he became the principal of the Royal Academy of Music. He had very poor eyesight, Macfarren, most of his life, and was virtually blind in his latter years. Nevertheless, he managed to write 8 symphonies and a good deal of other interesting pieces as well. They're not very well known today. I've had to search out some very interesting CDs, and I found them quite rewarding. He was at one time referred to as the English Beethoven, which of course is ridiculous. Perhaps the English Mendelssohn would be more in line with his kind of style. Anyway, here's a little piece of his, just to get a taste of a very little-known 19th century English composer. I'm going to play the 4th movement, the finale of his 4th symphony in F minor, the music of George Macfarren. A little taste there of the music of George McFerrin, a very fine English composer, a contemporary of Arthur Sullivan. Yes, there was a kind of Mendelssohnian lightness of touch there, if I can put it that way, and also something of the manner of Spohr, which is probably not very helpful. I mean, to say that the music of an unknown composer is very much like the music of another virtually unknown composer. But Spohr, of course, was very famous in the first half of the 19th century. He visited England 5 times, and his symphonies and oratorios were extremely popular in the years before and after Mendelssohn's famous visits here. So McFerrin would have known his music and the music of Mendelssohn very well indeed. I think that's a very well written piece with a nice little fugue at the end, just to show that he was a serious composer. Well, jolly well done, George McFerrin. We'll return to something of your music in a later programme, I'm sure. Let's have something now choral, and a piece sung by one of the island's best known and finest choral groups. This is the Tallis Scholars. I have heard them several times. They do specialise in music of the Renaissance, but not just music of the Renaissance, as we shall hear. Now, I've found a disc of their music. Unfortunately, there are no details on the disc as to when it was recorded, but it must be fairly recently, because I recognise some of the names of some of the people in the choir, and they're all alive and kicking. Christiana Littman, of course, Juliet Tranter, who sometimes leads the Isle of Man Symphony Orchestra, Ursula Weeks, the wife of Chris Weeks, one of the tenors, who is the principal horn in the orchestra, Fenella Bazin, of course, Dr. Bazin, Ellen Callister, a fine recorder player and a viol player, I seem to remember, and Matt Brewster in the basses. So this recording must be fairly recent. As I say, a very fine choir, and directed by Brian Head. I'm going to play John Stainer's God So Loved the World from his oratorio, The Crucifixion.
Son
John Stainer's God So Loved the World from the oratorio, very popular in the Victorian age, The Crucifixion, sung by our own the Tallis Consort, directed by Brian Head. It's a pity that we don't hear The Crucifixion anymore. It has a lot to offer still and can be quite moving in the sensitive hands and of course very well sung. That brings us to the end of the programme. Can you believe it? Please join me next Thursday at 9, in which I shall certainly have some more light music premieres, at least 3 pieces that I've never played on the programme before, and that 2 of them I didn't even know before I started to sort them out. So that'll be quite interesting for me, and I hope for you as well. We need something to play us out with. Charles Williams, Exhilaration. Bye-bye.